Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Gregory Pierce and this video series is dedicated to preparing you to develop your first game for a hackathon or game jam. At the completion of this series, you should have all of the skills necessary to successfully build a fun and exciting game using Unity by Unity Technologies. While the focus of this video series is specifically 3D games, the skills that you get from it, you'll be able to take and build 2D games as well. So before we get started, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who I am and some of my interests and how those things apply to Unity. So who am I? So first, as I mentioned before, my name is Gregory Pierce, and I'm a professional nerd. I enjoy learning all sorts of things, and the companies that I work for tend to pay me to apply that knowledge to their businesses. It's a great functional relationship. I currently work for a fintech. We recently IPO'd last year. The company's called Green Sky. We're based out of Atlanta, and I lead architecture and development projects over there. I started my computer science career with a Bachelor of Science degree from Xavier University, which is located in New Orleans. Later moved over to Georgia Tech. Decided to pursue a degree in international business while studying at Georgia Tech. Go Jackets! One of my focuses for Georgia Tech and international business was to get a better understanding of the business environment outside of the United States so that we could start to apply a lot of the things that we build and learn here overseas and in other environments, business environments that are a little bit different. I've published several books and papers, some on Unity, some on Direct3D from Microsoft, and I've been very active in teaching and training kids in technology and business. Currently hold positions on the board of directors for several kids clubs and robotics organizations. I also teach and train a few robotics teams. I coach one team that's in Lego robotics, and I coach another team that's in the first robotics league. They build much bigger, more capable robots. I do a lot of personal competition with robots as well. Deep Racer, a lot of Amazon competitions, Robo Rally, and so forth. I recently founded a startup in AI, which is focused on applied solutions for artificial intelligence. The company is named Pincer AI, which is French for thinker. And I've built a lot of cool things over the years for companies in the past, including kiosks, drone applications, and I actually worked on the engine for Minecraft back in the day. Seems like an eternity ago. But it's really cool to see how that has progressed over the years. Lastly, I'm preparing myself to start a PhD program with a focus on autonomous systems, computer vision, and deep reinforcement learning. And I've been working primarily for the Pincer AI. One of our focus products there is to build a framework for building working robots for home, retail, and hospital solutions. So now that I've talked to you a little bit about myself, now let's talk about what we're going to be doing. So what is a hackathon, and what do we need to do to prepare for it? So a hackathon is a several-day event. It's usually 3 days. Usually starts on a Friday, ends on a Sunday, sometimes on a Monday. And in a hackathon, you have teams that form to develop an innovative solution to some problem that's been presented to the teams by the hosts of the hackathon. Typically, on the first day, you'll be briefed on some technology or service that you will use during the hackathon. And after those presentations, you'll start working with your team to come up with an idea and build a solution to the problem that was posed to you using the technologies. At the end of the hackathon, each team is going to go on a stage and present its solution to both the other competitors and to all of the judges, and then a winner will be chosen. As far as the ground rules are concerned, there aren't a lot of rules, but there are 3 basic rules. Now they can vary from hackathon to game jam, etc., but ours are going to be very straightforward. 1, you can't buy your solution off the shelf. You can't go to the asset store and just buy something, change some of the art assets, and then say that that's your entry into the hackathon. That's not going to fly. But you can go and customize a solution. So if you go and you find a racing game and you want to take some of the racing mechanic that already works and reuse that racing part with some other things, that's totally fine. Second, your solution should be something original. You shouldn't be using something that you're already working on. I know some of you are probably Unity developers. You've been making some games before. You may have some art assets that you've already built before. Use something original. You really want to build something for this project specifically. And because of that, rule number 2 is you can't really use anything that you already have. And the third rule is just play fair. You can't disrupt the other teams. There was a hackathon I was at, which was actually a hackers hackathon, where one of the teams spent its time building solutions that would disrupt the other teams so they couldn't get to the servers and so forth. And we don't want to allow any of that stuff. That's off limits. You can't disrupt the other teams. Beyond that, there are no rules. Try things out. Try crazy things. You may start off with a lot of failure in the beginning, but it's really the crazy things that are going to give you that edge in the competition. It's going to be those things that are uncommon, that people haven't seen before, that are going to give you that edge for winning. And that's really where most of your great games come from to begin with. So, for example, some of the recent crazy games that we've seen in the space are the Untitled Goose Game. And in that game, you're just a goose that's going around the world stealing stuff and harassing people. Another one, Super Meat Boy. You're a piece of meat on a quest. You're an actual piece of meat. Another one is Katamari Damacy. Your job is to just gather all of these things in the world together into a huge ball. And the last one, of course, is Death Stranding. Now, I have no idea what this game is really about, but it's definitely different. It sold well. I never quite understood the concept of the bridge babies and so forth, but for those of you out there who enjoy that game, power to you. It didn't really resonate with me, but it was very unique and original, and I own it because it was unique and original. So now that we're done with that stuff, let's talk a little bit about what we will be working on. What's our agenda? So there are 6 parts to the prep work, and after those 6 parts, you will understand pretty much everything that you need in order to build a game in Unity. There's going to be a lot of sample code that you're going to get. You're going to see me working on some things in video. You can use any of that stuff in your projects. That's all within the bounds of reusing existing stuff that you find. So on the first part, we're going to do an introduction to Unity. Make sure that you guys have it set up properly. If you don't, go through the install. This is going to be useful for you after Hackathon when you're working on your real projects. Some Unity core concepts. What are the different pieces? What do they do? How does the interface work? And so forth. In part 2, that's where we're really going to get into world building. What's a scene? How do game objects work? What are prefabs and how does that work? Lighting, cameras, basic audio. We're also going to talk about the asset store. There's a lot of stuff on the asset store. Probably your first day, you should be looking through the asset store for the things that you want to use in your projects. I know that there are a lot of teams in the past that have tried to create a lot of their assets and make them work. It's really not in your best interest to do so. It's better for you to go into the asset store, find assets that already do some of what you want to do, just reuse them, repurpose them, because you don't want to waste a lot of time trying to come up with something original during a hackathon. You've only got 3 days. You really just don't have the time. In part 3, we'll talk a little bit about user input, interactivity, and scripting. We've got a lot of scripts that I'm going to be giving you guys so that you don't have to learn scripting. We'll talk about it, but you won't have to write a lot of scripts. There will be a lot of interactivity that you will get from those scripts that you'll simply be able to apply in your games. We'll talk about commands and event systems, so basically how to get things to make other things to happen. If I push this button, this door opens. If I hit this player, they take damage, etc., etc. Those are the sorts of things that we'll have in the command and event systems. We also have in part 4 physics. So we'll talk about gravity, how that works in Unity, colliders and collision detection. How do you make sure that objects are hitting each other? We'll also talk a little bit about collision avoidance, objects passing through other objects, and so forth. Those are things that hopefully you won't run into during your hackathon projects, but you may run into in other larger projects. We'll discuss that. In part 5, we'll go through animations. So basically taking 3D players and animating them, assigning actions to their various states so that you can go from walking to running to jumping to attacking, all of those sorts of things. We already have a lot of that stuff already baked into some characters, so you can reuse those characters. You can change them if you like, but you can reuse those characters in your game, and you will get a leg up on having stuff that works so that you can prototype your game. We'll work on players and enemies. There are some scripts that work specifically for those, things that will allow them to see each other and attack each other, take damage, die, and so forth. We'll also deal with navigation meshes, and that is really about how do things know how to move in your world. Object spawning. We'll talk about how enemies can be spawned from various locations, how you can spawn projectiles, and so forth. All of that will be in part 5. And finally, in part 6, we'll talk about basic user interfaces. The kit that you'll be working with will give you most of the interface that you should need for your games, but we will talk about basic user interfaces so that if you want to customize your interface, you can. And last but not least, we'll talk about deployment. While in the hackathon, you can go up there and run your stuff right out of Unity. You're going to really need to understand deployment and how that works and how you can push it out to the real world, because that's the way that your final projects are going to need to function. So some helpful hints. Remember, you're making a game. It's not an art project. It's not a programming assignment. It's a game. So it has to function, and it should be fun. Those two things are more important than all of the aesthetics. Time is a luxury that you don't have a lot of, and I have to stress that enough. You don't have a lot of time. These presentations are short to maximize the amount of time that you have to work. In the past, we've had lots more longer presentations to try and really give you a lot of detail into the various systems. But that eats into the time that you have to actually work on your projects. So I've spent a lot of time to shrink a lot of this stuff down so that you can focus on your game, because you're going to need that time to build the systems that are necessary in order for your game to be working and fun. Remember, the only thing that's judged is what actually works. You won't be able to go on stage and say, you know, this would have been cool, we were going to try and do this, etc., etc. None of that matters. The only thing that's going to be judged is what actually works when you present it. So make sure your game works, make sure that everything's functional, and please do yourselves a favor and don't try and change your games at the last minute. I have seen lots of teams in the last hour before their presentations try and squeeze things in there, and only to have their games breaking right before they had to present. So keep your loop tight. Make sure you guys come up with some reasonable cutoffs for when you're going to stop adding new stuff to your game and start testing. And the last thing is, every year, every single year, there is a team that tries to go above and beyond and do something grandiose. They're going to make Super Mario 64 over the weekend, and at the end of the hackathon, they're struggling to get something that works. This also happens on larger projects too. So you really need to focus on what's important. The core gameplay is what's important. Spend your time there. You don't need to build massive worlds, massive levels, millions of characters, truly intelligent enemies, and so forth during the hackathon. You want to be ambitious, but at the same time, be practical. So with that said, let's get started.